The morning sun painted golden streaks across the massive glass windows of airport in London. Thousands of travelers moved through the busy terminal like rivers flowing in different directions. Some rushed to catch their flights while others sat quietly waiting for their boarding calls. The smell of coffee from nearby shops mixed with the sound of rolling suitcases and distant announcements. In the middle of Terminal 5 stood a beautiful black piano. It was one of those public pianos that airports put out for anyone to play. Most of the time, people walked past it without a second glance. Sometimes a brave soul would sit down and play a simple tune before hurrying off to their gate. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something different was about to happen. Something that would change the life of a 12-year-old girl named Maya forever. Maya stood near the large windows with her grandmother, watching airplanes take off into the cloudy British sky. She was a small girl with long black hair that fell past her shoulders and big brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She wore a simple blue dress with white flowers and carried a worn-out backpack that had been her companion for many years. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another young traveler waiting for her flight. But Maya was not ordinary. She had a gift that very few people in the world possessed. She had been playing piano since she was 3 years old, and music lived inside her like a second heartbeat. Her fingers could dance across piano keys in ways that made grown adults cry. But hardly anyone knew about her talent because Maya came from a small village in the mountains of northern China, where her family lived a simple and quiet life. Her grandmother, Wei, was a gentle woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had worked her entire life as a teacher in their village school. This trip to London was her first time ever leaving China, and everything around her seemed magical and overwhelming. She held Maya's hand tightly as if afraid the crowd might swallow her granddaughter whole. They were on their way to Manchester, where Maya had been invited to audition for a prestigious music scholarship at one of England's finest music academies. It was an opportunity that came once in a lifetime. A music teacher from Europe had visited their village 2 years ago and heard Maya playing on an old broken piano in the community center. He had been so moved by her playing that he recorded a video and sent it to his contacts in England. That video had traveled from person to person until it reached the director of the Royal Northern Academy of Music. The director had watched the video 17 times. Each time, tears rolled down his cheeks. He had never heard such pure emotion come from someone so young. He immediately arranged for Maya and her grandmother to fly to England for a proper audition. The Academy paid for everything because they believed Maya was special. They believed she could become one of the greatest pianists the world had ever seen. But Maya did not know any of this. Her grandmother had kept most of these details from her to avoid putting too much pressure on the young girl. All Maya knew was that she was going to play piano for some important people, and if she played well, she might get to study music at a big school in England. The flight from Beijing to London had been long and tiring. 14 hours in the air with a layover in Dubai had left both of them exhausted. Maya had never been on an airplane before this journey. She had spent most of the flight with her face pressed against the window, watching clouds pass by like cotton candy mountains. Her grandmother had slept restlessly, worried about everything that could go wrong in a foreign land where she did not speak the language. Now they had a 4-hour wait before their connecting flight to Manchester. Maya's grandmother had found 2 seats near the window and told her granddaughter to rest, but Maya was too excited to sit still. Her eyes wandered around the terminal, taking in all the sights she had never seen before. She saw people of every color and nationality. She heard languages she could not understand. She smelled foods she had never tasted. And then she saw the piano. It stood alone in the middle of the walkway like an island in an ocean of people. The black surface gleamed under the bright airport lights. Maya felt her heart skip a beat. She had not touched a piano in 3 days, which was the longest she had ever gone without playing since she first learned at age 3. Her fingers actually ached to feel the keys beneath them. She tugged at her grandmother's sleeve and pointed toward the piano. Her grandmother looked up from the English she was studying and squinted her eyes to see what Maya was pointing at. "Can I play?" Maya asked in Mandarin. Her voice was soft and hopeful. Her grandmother looked around nervously. There were so many people everywhere. What if Maya made a mistake and embarrassed herself? What if someone yelled at them for touching something they were not supposed to touch? In their village, everything was familiar and safe. Here, everything was strange and scary. "I do not think we should," her grandmother replied. "We do not want to cause any trouble." Maya's face fell with disappointment. She understood her grandmother's concerns. They were visitors in a foreign country, and they did not want to do anything wrong. But the piano called to her like a magnet pulling at her soul. She could almost hear music playing in her head, begging to be released through her fingers. For the next 30 minutes, Maya tried to forget about the piano. She looked at her grandmother's and practiced saying hello and thank you in English. She ate a small sandwich her grandmother had packed from home. She watched the airplanes through the window, but her eyes kept drifting back to that beautiful black piano standing alone in the middle of the terminal. Several people had sat down to play during those 30 minutes. One man played a simple melody that sounded like a nursery rhyme. A teenage boy banged out a popular song that Maya did not recognize. A woman played a few bars of something classical before giving up and walking away. Each time someone played, a small crowd would gather for a moment before losing interest and moving on. Maya watched all of this with growing restlessness. She knew she could play better than any of them, not because she was proud or arrogant, but because music was simply part of who she was. It flowed through her veins like blood. It filled her lungs like air. Playing piano was as natural to her as breathing. Finally, she made a decision. She stood up from her seat and looked at her grandmother with determined eyes. "I need to play," she said quietly. "Just one song, please." Her grandmother saw something in Maya's eyes that she had seen many times before. It was the look Maya got when music was burning inside her and needed to come out. It was the look that had first appeared when Maya was just 3 years old and had climbed onto a piano bench at her neighbor's house. That day, Maya had played a melody she had heard on the radio perfectly from memory, without a single lesson. Wei sighed deeply and nodded her head. She could never say no to that look. "One song," she agreed. "Then we come back and sit quietly." Maya smiled brightly and kissed her grandmother's cheek. Then she turned and walked toward the piano with her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything she ever knew about her life. She had no idea that hundreds of people were about to witness something extraordinary. She had no idea that her entire future was about to be decided by what her fingers would play on a stranger's piano in a busy airport terminal thousands of miles from home. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. A businessman walked past without looking at her. A family with 3 children hurried by, pulling their luggage behind them. Nobody paid any attention to the small Chinese girl standing next to the public piano. Maya took a deep breath and sat down on the wooden bench. The piano bench felt cool beneath Maya's legs as she adjusted her position. She placed her small hands on the keys without pressing them, just feeling the smooth ivory surface beneath her fingertips. This was something she always did before playing. She called it listening to the piano. Every instrument had its own voice, its own personality, and Maya believed she needed to understand each piano before she could truly make it sing. Around her, the airport continued its endless dance of arrivals and departures. The announcement system crackled with gate changes and final boarding calls. The smell of brewing coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. People rushed past in every direction, their footsteps creating a rhythm of their own against the polished floor. Nobody stopped to watch the small girl at the piano. To them, she was just another traveler passing time before a flight. They expected nothing special. They had seen dozens of people sit at that piano before, playing forgettable tunes that disappeared into the noise of the terminal as quickly as they were played. Maya closed her eyes and took several slow, deep breaths. In her mind, she traveled back to her village in the mountains of Gansu province. She saw her mother standing in their small kitchen, preparing dinner after a long day working in the rice fields. She saw her father sitting by the window, reading old newspapers by the fading sunlight. She saw her little brother chasing chickens around their dusty courtyard. She saw the old piano in the community center, with its chipped keys and broken pedal, where she had practiced for hours every day since she was a child. That piano had been donated to the village by a charity organization many years ago. It was out of tune and missing several keys, but to Maya, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She had taught herself to play on that broken instrument, learning to work around its flaws and limitations. Her music teacher in the village had once said that if Maya could make such beautiful music on such a terrible piano, imagine what she could do with a proper instrument. Now, sitting before this magnificent black piano in airport, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This piano was perfect. Its keys were smooth and responsive. Its sound would be clear and bright. She could feel the quality of the instrument just by touching it. She decided to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, a composition that most professional pianists spent years mastering. The piece lasted about 10 minutes and required incredible technical skill as well as deep emotional understanding. It told a story of love, loss, and longing through its complex melodies and thundering climaxes. Maya had learned this piece by herself, using recordings she found on an old computer at the village library. She had no sheet music, so she learned it entirely by ear, listening to each section hundreds of times until she could play it perfectly from memory. Her village music teacher had cried the first time he heard her perform it completely. She pressed her fingers down on the first notes, and the music began. The opening melody floated into the air like a whisper. It was soft and questioning, like someone calling out in the darkness looking for an answer. The notes were simple at first, almost hesitant, building slowly like clouds gathering before a storm. Maya kept her eyes closed, lost in the world of sound she was creating. A woman walking past stopped suddenly. She had been looking at her phone, scrolling through messages, when something made her look up. The music caught her ear like a hook pulling her toward the piano. She stood motionless, her phone forgotten in her hand, staring at the small girl on the bench. The melody began to grow. Maya's fingers moved faster now, weaving complex patterns across the keys. The sound filled the space around the piano, reaching out like invisible hands to touch everyone nearby. More people stopped walking. More heads turned. More eyes fixed on the unexpected scene unfolding in the middle of the terminal. A pilot in uniform paused on his way to a gate. He had played piano as a child and recognized the piece immediately. His jaw dropped slightly as he realized what he was witnessing. This was not some amateur playing a simple tune. This was something extraordinary. The music built toward its first big moment. Maya's hands flew across the keyboard with breathtaking speed and precision. The notes tumbled over each other like water rushing down a mountain stream. The sound grew louder and more intense, filling the entire area with waves of emotion. A grandmother holding her grandson's hand stopped to listen. The little boy looked up at Maya with wide, amazed eyes. He had never seen someone play piano like this. It seemed like magic to him, like the girl was casting a spell with her fingers. The crowd around the piano grew larger with each passing moment. People abandoned their rushing and their schedules to stand and listen. Businessmen set down their briefcases. Families stopped arguing about where to eat lunch. Flight attendants on their way to work paused in their steps. Even the workers at nearby shops came out to see what was happening. Maya remained unaware of the gathering audience. She was deep inside the music now, living in a world of pure sound and emotion. Her small body swayed gently with the melody. Her face showed every feeling the music expressed. Pain, joy, longing, hope. It all passed across her features like clouds moving across the sky. The middle section of the piece arrived, bringing a moment of calm after the storm. The melody became tender and sweet, like a love song sung in moonlight. Maya's touch on the keys was so gentle that the notes seemed to hang in the air like soap bubbles, beautiful and fragile. An elderly man in the crowd wiped a tear from his eye. The music reminded him of his wife who had passed away 3 years ago. She had loved Chopin. They had danced to this piece at their wedding 52 years ago. Hearing it now, played with such beauty by this unknown child, broke something open inside his heart. A young woman who was rushing to catch her flight stopped and forgot about her flight completely. She was a music student at a conservatory in Paris, and she knew exactly how difficult this piece was. She had been trying to master it for 2 years and still could not play it without mistakes. Yet this little girl, who looked no older than 12, was playing it flawlessly from memory. The crowd now numbered over 100 people, with more joining every moment. They formed a large circle around the piano, 3 and 4 people deep in places. Some held up their phones to record what they were seeing. Others just stood in silence, too moved to think about capturing the moment. Back at their seats by the window, Maya's grandmother noticed the growing crowd. Her heart began to race with worry. She could not see Maya through all the people, and she feared something bad had happened. She gathered her things quickly and hurried toward the crowd, pushing gently through the bodies to reach the front. When she finally saw Maya at the piano, she stopped cold. Her granddaughter was playing like she had never heard before. The airport piano seemed to have transformed into something magical under Maya's hands. The sound that came from it was richer and more beautiful than Wei had ever heard from any instrument. Tears began to fall down the grandmother's wrinkled cheeks. She had always known Maya was gifted, but this was something beyond what she had imagined. She was watching a true genius at work, and that genius was her own flesh and blood. The music climbed toward its dramatic conclusion. Maya's hands were flying now, striking the keys with power and precision that seemed impossible for someone her size. The melody rose higher and higher, building toward a climax that would shake the very walls of the terminal. The crowd held its breath collectively. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The entire world had shrunk down to this single moment, this single girl, this single piano, and the incredible sound pouring forth from their union. Maya struck the final chords with all the strength in her small body. The sound exploded into the air like fireworks, filling every corner of the terminal with thunderous beauty. Then, just as suddenly, silence fell. The last notes faded away, leaving nothing but the echo of something magnificent. For a moment, nobody knew what to do. The crowd stood frozen, still under the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then, as if someone had given a signal, the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding with all their might. The sound of clapping hands filled the terminal like a thunderstorm. People cheered and whistled. Some wiped tears from their eyes as they clapped. Maya opened her eyes slowly, returning from the world of music to the real world around her. What she saw made her gasp with surprise. Hundreds of people surrounded her, all of them clapping, all of them staring at her with expressions of wonder and amazement. She had been so lost in the music that she had not noticed the crowd gathering. Her cheeks turned bright red with embarrassment. She was not used to being the center of attention. In her village, she played for herself and her family, never for crowds of strangers. She did not know what to do or how to react. Then she saw her grandmother pushing through to the front of the crowd, tears streaming down her face but a proud smile on her lips. Maya jumped up from the bench and ran to her grandmother's arms. They embraced tightly while the crowd continued to applaud around them. But the moment was far from over, because standing in that crowd, watching with shocked and delighted eyes, was someone who would change Maya's life forever. The man standing at the edge of the crowd wore an expensive gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that cost more than most people earned in a month. His name was Richard Hammond, and he was one of the most powerful music executives in the entire United Kingdom. He was the founder and chairman of Sterling Music Group, a company that represented some of the world's most famous classical musicians. Richard had been walking through the terminal on his way to a first-class lounge when the music stopped him in his tracks. He had spent 40 years in the music industry, discovering and developing talent from every corner of the globe. He had heard thousands of musicians play, from struggling students to world-renowned masters. But in all those decades, he had never heard anything quite like what he had just witnessed. His hands were shaking slightly as the crowd's applause continued. He had arrived just as Maya began the dramatic final section of the Chopin piece, and those few minutes had been enough to tell him everything he needed to know. This girl was not just talented. She was not just gifted. She was a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. Richard watched as the small girl hugged an elderly woman who was clearly her grandmother. He saw the confusion and shyness on the girl's face as she looked around at the crowd. She seemed overwhelmed by all the attention, which told him she was not used to performing publicly. This made what he had just heard even more remarkable. The crowd began to slowly disperse as people remembered their flights and schedules. Many walked away still talking about what they had seen, still feeling the echo of that incredible music in their hearts. Some approached Maya and her grandmother, trying to offer compliments in English that the pair clearly did not understand. Richard made his decision quickly. He had not become one of the most successful music executives in the world by hesitating when opportunity presented itself. He straightened his tie, put on his most friendly and professional smile, and walked toward the girl and her grandmother. Maya noticed the tall man in the expensive suit approaching them. She instinctively moved closer to her grandmother, unsure whether this stranger meant good or bad. Her grandmother put a protective arm around her shoulder and watched the man with cautious eyes. "Hello," Richard said, speaking slowly and clearly. He realized immediately that they might not understand English well. "That was absolutely incredible. The most beautiful piano playing I have heard in years." Maya understood the word piano, and the tone of his voice told her he was saying something nice. She gave him a small, shy smile but did not respond. Richard pulled out his business card and handed it to the grandmother. Wei looked at the card with confusion, unable to read the English words printed on it, but she recognized the professional quality of the card and the serious expression on the man's face. This was clearly someone important. "I am a music manager," Richard said, pointing to himself and then making gestures that he hoped would convey his meaning. "Music, business, I help musicians." He pulled out his phone and quickly typed something into a translation app. He showed the screen to the grandmother, where his words had been translated into Mandarin. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "My name is Richard Hammond. I am the chairman of Sterling Music Group. I would very much like to speak with you about your granddaughter's future. She has an extraordinary gift." Wei read the message twice, making sure she understood correctly. Her heart began to beat faster. She had heard of Western music companies, of course, but she never imagined she would meet someone from one. And here was this important man, calling Maya's gift extraordinary. She typed a response in Mandarin and showed it to Richard. "Thank you for your kind words. We are on our way to Manchester for an audition at a music school." Richard read the translation and nodded enthusiastically. He typed another message. "The Royal Northern Academy, I know it well. I am on their board of advisors. Please, may I buy you lunch? I would like to learn more about this talented young lady." Maya watched this exchange with curious eyes. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she could sense that something important was unfolding. Her grandmother looked nervous but also excited, which was unusual for the normally calm and controlled woman. Wei hesitated. Everything in her traditional upbringing told her to be careful of strangers, especially wealthy Western businessmen. But she also recognized that this could be an important opportunity for Maya. They had not come all this way to let fear hold them back. "We have time before our flight," she finally typed in response. "We would be honored to join you." Richard's face broke into a genuine smile. He gestured toward a nearby restaurant and began walking, checking frequently to make sure they were following. Maya held her grandmother's hand tightly as they made their way through the crowd. The restaurant was much nicer than anything Maya had ever seen. White tablecloths covered every table. Crystal glasses sparkled under elegant lighting. Waiters in black uniforms moved silently between tables, carrying plates of food that looked like works of art. Richard spoke to the host in rapid English, and they were immediately led to a private table in a quiet corner. He pulled out chairs for both Maya and her grandmother, a gesture of respect that Wei noted with approval. Once they were seated, Richard used his translation app to begin asking questions. He learned that Maya was 12 years old and had been playing piano since she was 3. He learned that she had never had formal training, that she had taught herself using old recordings and a broken piano in a village community center. He learned that she could play dozens of complex pieces entirely from memory. With each answer, Richard's amazement grew. Self-taught on a broken piano in a remote Chinese village, yet playing Chopin with the skill and emotion of a seasoned concert pianist. It seemed impossible, yet he had witnessed it with his own eyes just minutes ago. He asked Maya, through the translation app, what music meant to her. Maya thought about the question carefully before typing her response. "Music is how I breathe. It is how I see the world. When I am sad, music helps me feel better. When I am happy, music makes me happier. I cannot imagine my life without it. When I play, I feel like I am flying." Richard read her words and felt his throat tighten with emotion. In all his years in the business, he had heard countless musicians try to explain their connection to music. But this simple, honest answer from a 12-year-old girl touched him more deeply than any of them. He ordered food for the table, choosing dishes that he thought would be familiar and enjoyable for his guests. While they waited, he began to tell them about himself and his company. He used the translation app to explain that Sterling Music Group had helped launch the careers of many famous musicians. He showed them photos on his phone of concert halls filled with thousands of people, of musicians receiving awards, of albums that had sold millions of copies. Maya looked at the photos with wonder. She had never imagined that music could lead to such things. In her village, music was something people did for fun, not something that could make you famous or fill giant concert halls with cheering fans. The food arrived, and they ate together while Richard continued to ask questions and share information. He learned about Maya's family, about her village, about the journey that had brought them to London. With each detail, the story became more remarkable. Wei began to relax as the meal progressed. Richard seemed genuine and kind, not at all like the scary businessmen she had imagined from Western movies. He treated them with respect and showed real interest in Maya as a person, not just as a potential source of money. Near the end of the meal, Richard made his proposal. He typed carefully into his translation app, wanting to make sure every word was understood correctly. "I would like to offer Maya a recording contract with Sterling Music Group. We would pay for the best musical education available anywhere in the world. We would introduce her to the greatest pianists and teachers. We would manage her career and help her share her gift with millions of people. This is a serious offer. I believe Maya could become one of the most famous pianists in history." Wei read the message 3 times. Her hands were trembling as she set down the phone. This was beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible for her granddaughter. A recording contract, the best education in the world, the chance to share Maya's music with millions. But she was also a practical woman who had lived through difficult times. She knew that such offers often came with hidden costs and complicated conditions. She did not want to make any decisions without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. She typed her response carefully. "This is a very generous offer. We are grateful for your interest in Maya, but we need time to think about this. We have family in China who must be consulted, and we still have the audition in Manchester to complete." Richard nodded with understanding and respect. He had expected such a response. A rushed decision would have actually worried him more. It showed wisdom and good judgment that they wanted time to consider everything properly. "Of course," he typed back. "Take all the time you need. Here is my personal phone number and email. Contact me whenever you are ready to talk more. And please, let me know how the audition goes. I am confident Maya will impress everyone she plays for." He paid for the meal and walked them back toward their gate. Before they parted, he knelt down to look Maya in the eyes. Even though she could not understand his words, he spoke to her from his heart. "You have something special inside you, Maya. Something that very few people in this world possess. Your music has the power to change lives, to bring joy and beauty to millions of people. I hope I have the privilege of helping you share that gift with the world." Maya did not understand the words, but she understood the sincerity in his eyes. She smiled and nodded, feeling somehow that this meeting was meant to happen, that her life was beginning to change in ways she could not yet imagine. They said goodbye, and Richard watched as the girl and her grandmother walked toward their gate. He already knew that he had just discovered something extraordinary. Now he just had to hope they would give him the chance to help it grow. The flight from London to Manchester took less than an hour, but for Maya it felt like an eternity. Her mind was racing with everything that had happened since that morning. The piano, the crowd, the applause, the important man with his incredible offer. It all seemed like a dream that she might wake up from at any moment. Her grandmother sat beside her in silence, staring out the window at the clouds below. Wei was lost in her own thoughts, trying to process the sudden turn their journey had taken. They had come to England hopping for a scholarship to a music school. Now they had a millionaire music executive offering recording contracts and world-class education. It was almost too much to believe. When they landed in Manchester, a taxi took them to a small hotel near the academy. The room was simple but clean, with two narrow beds and a window that looked out over a busy street. Maya immediately fell asleep, exhausted from the long journey and the emotional intensity of the day. But Wei could not sleep. She sat in a chair by the window and watched the strange city lights until late into the night. She thought about her son and daughter-in-law back in China, working hard in the rice fields to support their family. She thought about Maya's younger brother, who would probably never have the opportunities his sister was being offered. She thought about her late husband, who had passed away 10 years ago and would have been so proud to see his granddaughter now. She also thought about Richard Hammond's offer. It sounded wonderful, almost too wonderful. But Wei had learned through decades of life that wonderful things often came with difficult complications. She would need to understand exactly what a recording contract meant before she could advise her family on whether to accept. The next morning, Maya woke up feeling refreshed and ready for her audition. She ate a simple breakfast of bread and fruit while her grandmother reviewed the directions to the academy. At 9 o'clock, they left the hotel and began walking through the unfamiliar streets of Manchester. The Royal Northern Academy of Music was housed in a beautiful old building with tall columns and large windows. Maya stood outside for a moment, looking up at the impressive structure with awe. This was where some of the finest musicians in Britain had trained. This was where she hoped to study and grow. They entered through heavy wooden doors and found themselves in a grand lobby with polished marble floors and portraits of famous musicians hanging on the walls. A kind woman at a reception desk checked their names on a list and directed them to a waiting room down a long corridor. The waiting room was already occupied by several other young people and their parents. Maya could feel the tension in the air immediately. Everyone was nervous. Everyone was hopping to impress. Everyone understood that their futures might be decided in the next few hours. She counted 8 other children around her age, each sitting with 1 or 2 adults who were clearly their parents. Some of the children looked confident and relaxed, as if they had done this many times before. Others looked as nervous as Maya felt, fidgeting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. A boy about her age sat across the room with his mother. He had curly red hair and freckles scattered across his face. He caught Maya's eye and gave her a friendly smile, which she returned shyly. She wondered where he was from and what instrument he played. One by one, the candidates were called into the audition room. Some came out smiling and relieved. Others came out looking disappointed and sad. Maya watched each one carefully, trying to guess what had happened inside that mysterious room. As the morning progressed, Maya began to feel more and more anxious. Her palms were sweating. Her stomach was tight with nerves. She had played piano thousands of times before, but never with so much at stake. If she failed this audition, she would return to her village and probably never have another chance like this. Her grandmother sensed her worry and took her hand gently. She leaned close and whispered in Mandarin, "Remember what your grandfather always said. The piano is your friend, not your enemy. When you sit down to play, you are not fighting against anything. You are simply having a conversation with an old friend." Maya nodded and closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather's kind face. He had been the one to first put her on a piano bench when she was just 3 years old. He had recognized her gift before anyone else and had encouraged her to practice every single day. He had died believing she would one day play for the whole world to hear. Finally, Maya's name was called. She stood up on shaking legs and followed a staff member down another long corridor to a large door. The staff member opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The audition room was enormous. High ceilings arched overhead, decorated with beautiful paintings of musical instruments and dancing figures. Large windows let in streams of natural light that fell across a stunning black grand piano in the center of the room. Behind a table near the back sat 4 adults with serious expressions and notepads in their hands. One of them, a woman with silver hair and glasses, stood up and walked toward Maya with a warm smile. "Welcome, Maya. My name is Professor Elizabeth Wright. I am the director of the piano program here at the Academy. We are very excited to hear you play today." Maya did not understand every word, but she understood enough. She bowed respectfully and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, as if she were walking through water. The piano seemed very far away, though it was only a few meters from the door. She reached the bench and sat down slowly. The piano before her was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Its black surface gleamed like a mirror. Its keys were perfectly white and black, without a single chip or stain. She placed her hands on the keys and felt their smooth coolness beneath her fingers. For a moment she could not remember any of the pieces she had prepared. Her mind went completely blank. Panic began to rise in her chest. What was she supposed to play? Why could she not remember anything? Then she heard her grandfather's voice in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "The piano is your friend. You are just having a conversation." Maya took a deep breath and let her hands begin to move. She did not consciously choose what to play. She simply let the music flow out of her naturally, like water from a spring. The piece that emerged was Moonlight Sonata, one of the first classical compositions she had ever learned. The opening notes filled the room like moonlight filling a dark forest. Soft, mysterious, beautiful. The judges leaned forward in their seats, their pens motionless above their notepads. Maya closed her eyes and let herself disappear into the music. She was no longer in an audition room in Manchester. She was back home in her village, sitting at the old broken piano in the community center. Her grandfather was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, listening with a proud smile on his face. Her parents were standing in the doorway, their hard day of work forgotten as they listened to their daughter play. The music grew and changed, moving through the different movements of the sonata. Maya's fingers danced across the keys with effortless grace. Every note was perfectly placed, every phrase perfectly shaped. The sound that came from the piano was rich and full and deeply moving. Professor Wright felt tears forming in her eyes. In 30 years of teaching, she had heard hundreds of young pianists audition, but she had never heard anyone play with such natural beauty and emotional depth. This girl was not just technically skilled. She had something that could not be taught, something that came from the soul. The other judges were equally captivated. One of them, a strict man who rarely showed emotion, had his hand pressed against his chest as if trying to control his heartbeat. Another, a young woman who had been a concert pianist herself, was crying silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. Maya played through all 3 movements of the sonata without pause, nearly 15 minutes of music that she performed entirely from memory. When the final notes faded away, she sat motionless for a moment, returning slowly from the world of music to the real world around her. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judges seemed frozen in their seats, still processing what they had just experienced. Then Professor Wright began to clap, slowly at first, then faster and louder. The other judges joined in, their applause echoing through the large room. One of them stood up from his seat, then another, until all 4 judges were standing and applauding the 12-year-old girl from a small village in China. Maya opened her eyes and saw the standing ovation. Her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment and joy. She had not expected such a reaction. She had simply played from her heart, the way she always did. Professor Wright walked toward the piano with tears still glistening in her eyes. She reached out and took Maya's small hands in her own. "My dear child," she said softly, "where have you been hiding all these years? The world has been waiting for someone like you." Maya did not understand all the words, but she understood the emotion behind them. She smiled up at the professor and felt, for the first time since arriving in England, that everything was going to be all right. Outside in the waiting room, Wei clutched the arms of her chair with white-knuckled fingers. She had heard the muffled sound of the piano through the walls, and even through the barrier, she could tell Maya was playing magnificently. When the applause came, louder than any she had heard all morning, she knew her granddaughter had done something special. The door opened and Maya emerged, her face glowing with happiness. She ran to her grandmother and threw her arms around her neck. "I think it went well," she whispered in Mandarin. Wei laughed and hugged her tight. "I think it did too, my sweet girl. I think it went very well indeed." 3 days after the audition, Maya and her grandmother were back in their village in China. The journey home had felt much shorter than the journey out, filled with excited conversations about everything that had happened. They arrived at their small farmhouse just as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maya's parents were waiting for them at the front gate. Her mother, Lina, was a thin woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by years of farm work. Her father, Wei, was a quiet man who showed his love through actions rather than words. They had been anxious for news ever since receiving Wei's brief phone calls from England. The family sat together around their small wooden table, eating a simple dinner of rice and vegetables while Maya and her grandmother told their story. Maya's younger brother, an 8-year-old boy named, listened with his mouth hanging open, barely touching his food. When they got to the part about Richard Hammond and his offer, the room fell silent. Wei set down his chopsticks and looked at his mother with serious eyes. A recording contract with a major music company was beyond anything their family had ever imagined. What exactly would this contract mean? He asked carefully. What would Maya have to do? Wei pulled out the business card Richard had given her and placed it on the table. "I do not know all the details yet. He said we should contact him when we are ready to discuss further, but he mentioned paying for Maya's education and helping her become a professional musician." Lena reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "What do you want, Maya? This is your life we are talking about." Maya thought about the question seriously before answering. She had been thinking about it constantly since leaving England, trying to understand her own feelings about everything that had happened. "I want to play piano," she said simply. "That is what I have always wanted. I do not care about being famous or making money. I just want to play. If this man can help me become a better pianist, then maybe it is a good opportunity." Her father nodded slowly. He was a practical man who understood that opportunities like this did not come often. But he was also protective of his daughter and worried about sending her into a world he did not understand. "We should learn more before making any decisions," he said. "Your grandmother will contact this Richard Hammond and ask many questions. We will not agree to anything until we understand exactly what we are agreeing to." Before they could discuss further, there was a knock at the door. It was their neighbor, old Mister, who had heard they had returned from England. Within minutes, the news had spread through the small village, and more neighbors began arriving to hear about the trip. The tiny farmhouse was soon crowded with curious villagers, all wanting to know what the big city was like, what airplanes felt like, what English people looked like. Maya found herself surrounded by familiar faces asking endless questions. But the biggest surprise came the next morning when Wei checked her phone and found dozens of messages from numbers she did not recognize. One of the passengers on their flight from Manchester to London had recorded a video of Maya playing in the airport terminal. He had posted it online with a caption about discovering an incredible young pianist. The video had gone viral overnight. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. News websites from around the world were picking up the story. A young girl from a poor Chinese village, self-taught on a broken piano, stunning an airport crowd with her incredible talent. It was the kind of story that captured people's hearts. Reporters began calling, asking for interviews. Television stations wanted to send camera crews to the village. Music schools from 3 different countries sent emails offering scholarships. A famous pianist in Germany posted about the video, calling Maya a prodigy who deserved to be heard by the world. The family was completely overwhelmed. They had no experience with media attention or internet fame. They did not even have a computer in their home. Everything was happening too fast for them to process. Wei made an urgent call to Richard Hammond, hoping he could help them understand what was happening. He answered immediately, sounding excited but also concerned. "I have seen the video," he said through a translator he had arranged. "The whole music world is talking about Maya. This is wonderful for her career, but it also means things are moving very quickly. You need professional help to manage this situation." He offered to send a team to China to help the family deal with the media attention and to discuss his contract offer in detail. The family agreed, realizing they were in over their heads. A week later, 3 people from Sterling Music Group arrived in the village. There was a lawyer named James who would explain the legal aspects of any agreements. There was a publicist named Sarah who would help manage the media inquiries. And there was Richard Hammond himself, who had flown halfway around the world because he wanted to see Maya's home with his own eyes. The village had never seen visitors like these before. The fancy cars they arrived in drew crowds of curious children. Their expensive clothes and electronic devices seemed like objects from another planet. Richard walked through the dusty streets with genuine interest, asking questions about the village's history and traditions. When they reached the family's farmhouse, Richard stopped and looked around with thoughtful eyes. He saw the small plot of land where the family grew vegetables. He saw the chickens scratching in the dirt courtyard. He saw the simple life that had produced such an extraordinary talent. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "Simple and honest and real. I think I understand Maya's music better now." The meeting took place inside the cramped farmhouse, with neighbors bringing extra chairs so everyone could sit. James the lawyer spread documents across the small table and began explaining, through a translator, exactly what Sterling Music Group was offering. They wanted to sign Maya to a 10-year contract. The company would pay for the best musical education in the world, either in England or at another top institution of Maya's choice. They would cover all expenses for Maya and one family member to live abroad while she studied. They would manage her concert schedule, recordings, and public appearances. In return, Sterling Music Group would receive a percentage of Maya's earnings from concerts and recordings. They would have approval over major career decisions. Maya would be expected to maintain a serious practice schedule and represent the company professionally. The lawyer explained each point carefully, making sure the family understood both the benefits and the obligations. There were many questions from Wei about what would happen if Maya wanted to stop playing, about whether she could return to China whenever she wanted, about how the family would be able to stay in contact. Richard answered each question honestly. "This is a partnership," he emphasized. "We succeed when Maya succeeds. We will never force her to do anything she does not want to do. Our job is to help her reach her full potential while also living a healthy, happy life." The negotiations continued for 3 days. Some points of the contract were changed based on the family's concerns. Additional protections were added for Maya's. A provision was included allowing the family to visit Maya in England twice each year at the company's expense. Finally, they reached an agreement that everyone felt good about. Maya would move to London with her grandmother to study at a prestigious music school. Her parents and brother would remain in China but would visit often. Sterling Music Group would manage her career with the family's input on all major decisions. On the day the contracts were signed, the whole village came out to celebrate. Someone had decorated the community center with colorful banners and paper flowers. Tables were set up with food that families had contributed. Music played from old speakers while people talked and laughed. Maya sat in a corner of the community center, overwhelmed by all the attention but also deeply happy. She looked at the old broken piano against the far wall, the instrument that had started her on this journey. It seemed impossible that those chipped keys and broken pedals had led to contracts and scholarship offers and millions of people watching her play online. Her grandmother came and sat beside her, following her gaze to the piano. "Do you remember the first time you played that piano?" Wei asked. Maya nodded. She had been 3 years old, barely able to climb onto the bench by herself. She had heard a song on the radio that morning and had come to the community center determined to figure out how to play it. Her grandfather had lifted her onto the bench and watched with amazement as her tiny fingers found the right keys. "He knew," her grandmother continued. "Your grandfather knew from that very first day that you were special. He used to say that you were not learning to play the piano. You were remembering how to play as if you had known all along." Maya leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. She missed her grandfather terribly and wished he could see everything that was happening. "I will make him proud," she whispered. "I will play so beautifully that he can hear me all the way in heaven." Wei smiled and kissed the top of her granddaughter's head. "You already have, my dear, you already have." The celebration continued late into the night. Maya played the old broken piano one last time for her village, making music that echoed through the mountain valley like a promise of things to come. 6 months had passed since Maya moved to London, and her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She lived in a beautiful apartment in a quiet neighborhood with her grandmother, who had adapted to city life with surprising grace. The apartment had large windows that looked out over a small park, where Maya liked to watch the seasons change while she practiced. And practice she did. For 6 to 8 hours every day, Maya sat at her new piano, a magnificent grand that Sterling Music Group had provided. She worked through scales and exercises, studied complex compositions, and refined every aspect of her technique. Her teachers at the Royal Academy of Music pushed her hard, recognizing that her natural talent needed to be matched with proper training. Her main instructor was Professor, a Russian pianist who had performed with the greatest orchestras in the world before retiring to teach. Professor was demanding and sometimes harsh, but she also recognized something special in Maya that she had not seen in any of her other students. "You have the gift," Professor told her one afternoon after a particularly intense lesson. "But a gift is only a seed. Without proper care and discipline, it will never grow into a tree. I am here to help you grow." Maya learned more in those 6 months than she had in all her previous years of self-teaching. She discovered techniques she never knew existed. She learned the history and theory behind the music she played. She began to understand why certain notes sounded good together and others did not, why certain rhythms created tension and others released it. But the most important thing she learned was about herself. She discovered that she could handle pressure, that she could push through exhaustion and frustration, that her love for music was stronger than any obstacle she faced. Every difficulty she overcame made her more confident in her abilities. Her grandmother adapted to their new life in different ways. Wei took English classes 3 times a week and was slowly learning to communicate in her new home. She explored the neighborhood, discovering shops and parks and friendly faces. She video called the family in China every evening, sharing stories and staying connected across the distance. But Wei's most important job was taking care of Maya. She made sure her granddaughter ate properly, slept enough, and did not work herself too hard. She noticed when Maya was stressed or homesick and knew how to comfort her. She was the anchor that kept Maya grounded while her career began to take off. And take off it did. The viral video from the airport continued to circulate, bringing new attention to Maya's story. Music magazines wrote profiles about the village girl who taught herself piano on a broken instrument. Television shows invited her to perform. Concert organizers began sending offers for appearances. Richard Hammond and his team at Sterling Music Group managed everything carefully. They did not want to overwhelm Maya with too many performances too soon. Instead, they selected opportunities that would help build her reputation while still allowing her time to study and develop. Her first major public performance was at a charity concert in London, where she played alongside several established musicians. Maya was nervous backstage, packing back and forth while her grandmother tried to calm her down. "There are over 1,000 people out there," Maya whispered, peeking through the curtains at the filled concert hall. "What if I make a mistake? What if they do not like me?" Her grandmother took her hands firmly. "Look at me, Maya. You have played for crowds before. You played for hundreds of people in that airport and you did not even know they were there. This is no different. Forget about the audience. Forget about everything except the music. The music is your friend." Maya nodded and took deep breaths, repeating her grandmother's words in her mind. "The music is your friend. The music is your friend." When her turn came, she walked onto the stage on trembling legs. The lights were bright and hot, and she could not see the faces of the audience beyond the first few rows. She sat down at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and let everything else fade away. She played Sla, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Her fingers flew across the keys with astonishing speed and precision. The delicate bell-like notes rang out through the concert hall, beautiful and clear and perfect. The audience sat in stunned silence as this small girl produced sounds that seemed impossible for someone so young. They watched her hands blur across the keyboard, creating cascades of notes that built and fell like ocean waves. They felt the emotion in every phrase, the joy and sadness and beauty woven together into something transcendent. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause began. Then it came like thunder, filling the concert hall with sound. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering and shouting praise. Maya stood and bowed, her cheeks flushed with effort and emotion. Backstage, after the performance, musicians who had been playing concerts for decades came to congratulate her. They shook her hand and told her she had a brilliant future ahead of her. One elderly violinist had tears in his eyes as he spoke to her through a translator. I have been performing for 50 years, he said, and tonight you reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Thank you, young lady. Thank you for that gift. The reviews of Maya's performance were glowing. Critics praised her technical brilliance and emotional depth. They called her a once-in-a-generation talent, a rising star who would shine for decades to come. Music blogs and social media exploded with discussions about the young Chinese prodigy. More offers came pouring in. Concert halls across Europe wanted her to perform. Recording companies expressed interest in producing her first album. Talk shows invited her to appear as a guest. The demand for Maya was growing every day. But not everything was easy. Living far from her family was hard, especially for a 12-year-old girl who had never been away from home before. She missed her parents terribly. She missed playing with her little brother. She missed the familiar sounds and smells of her village. Some nights she would lie awake in her comfortable London bed, crying quietly so her grandmother would not hear. She would think about the rice fields and the mountain paths and the neighbors who had known her since birth. London was exciting and full of opportunities, but it was not home. Her parents sensed her homesickness during their video calls. They could see the sadness in her eyes even when she smiled. It broke their hearts to watch their daughter struggle with loneliness, but they also knew she was pursuing something important. "We are so proud of you," her mother would say during every call. "What you are doing takes tremendous courage. Remember that we love you no matter what happens. If you ever want to come home, you can come home. But if you want to stay and keep playing, we will support you completely." Maya drew strength from her family's love and support. She reminded herself why she had come to London, what she was working toward. The chance to become the best pianist she could be. The chance to share her music with the world. The chance to honor her grandfather's memory by fulfilling the potential he had seen in her. She threw herself even more deeply into her studies. She arrived at the academy early and stayed late. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting too long. She listened to recordings of great pianists for hours, studying their interpretations and techniques. Professor noticed the change in her student. Maya had always been dedicated, but now there was a new intensity to her practice. It was as if something inside her had shifted, transforming talent into determination. "You are different," the professor observed one day. "Something has changed in you." Maya thought about how to answer. "I understand now why I am here," she said finally. "It is not just for myself. It is for my family, for my village, for everyone who believed in me. I cannot waste this opportunity. I have to become the best I can be." Professor smiled, a rare expression on her usually stern face. "Good, now we can really begin to work." The months that followed were the most intense of Maya's life. She learned pieces she had once thought impossible. She developed techniques that amazed even her experienced teachers. She began to find her own voice as an artist, a unique style that combined her Chinese heritage with her classical training. Her grandmother watched this transformation with pride and occasional worry. She made sure Maya took breaks, went for walks in the park, talked with friends online, did normal things that normal 13-year-old girls did. She knew that talent without balance led to burnout and unhappiness. One evening, as they sat together eating dinner, Wei shared some news from home. Maya's old music teacher from the village had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had been the one who first recognized her potential, who had encouraged her when everyone else said she was wasting her time with music. Maya cried that night, mourning another connection to her old life that had been lost. But she also felt something else, a deepened sense of responsibility. She was carrying the hopes and dreams of people who could no longer pursue their own. She would make them all proud, no matter what challenges lay ahead. 2 years had passed since that life-changing moment in airport. Maya was now 14 years old, taller and more mature, but still possessing the same quiet intensity that had captivated audiences from the very beginning. Her English had improved dramatically, allowing her to communicate directly with her teachers, friends, and the media without needing a translator. Her career had grown steadily during those 2 years. She had performed in concert halls across Europe, from the Royal Albert Hall in London to the Vienna to the in Amsterdam. Each performance built her reputation further, establishing her as one of the most exciting young pianists in the world. But the biggest opportunity of her life was about to present itself. The Berlin Philharmonic, one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world, was planning a special concert series celebrating young musical talent. They had invited the finest young soloists from around the globe to perform with their legendary orchestra, and they wanted Maya to be their featured pianist. The invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Richard Hammond called Maya and her grandmother to his office in central London to share the news. He could barely contain his excitement as he explained what was being offered. "The Berlin Philharmonic wants you to perform Piano Concerto No. 2 with them," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "This is one of the most difficult and beloved pieces in the piano repertoire, and they want you to play it in their main concert hall, in front of 2,000 people, broadcasted live to millions more around the world." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Second Piano Concerto was legendary. It was the piece that had launched its own career after a period of depression and self-doubt. It was dramatic and emotional and technically demanding beyond almost anything else in the classical catalog. "I have never played with an orchestra before," she said quietly. "I have only ever performed solo." Richard nodded understanding. "That is why they are giving you 3 months to prepare. You will work with a conductor here in London to learn how to coordinate with an orchestra. Then you will travel to Berlin for rehearsals with the Philharmonic themselves. They have complete faith in your abilities, Maya. This invitation is not given lightly." Her grandmother reached over and took Maya's hand. "What do you think, child? Do you want to do this?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the piece, which she had listened to hundreds of times but had never attempted to learn. She thought about the pressure of performing on such a huge stage, with the whole world watching. She thought about the possibility of failure, of embarrassing herself and everyone who had believed in her. But then she thought about her grandfather, who had always told her to reach for things that seemed impossible. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her this opportunity. She thought about her village, where everyone was following her journey with pride and hope. "Yes," she said finally, "I want to do this. I am scared, but I want to try." The next 3 months were the most challenging of Maya's young life. She learned the concerto note by note, spending countless hours at the piano working through its technical difficulties and emotional complexities. The piece was over 30 minutes long, with passages that pushed the boundaries of what human hands could achieve. Her work with the conductor, a patient Italian man named Marco, taught her skills she had never needed before. Playing with an orchestra was completely different from playing solo. She had to listen to dozens of other instruments while maintaining her own part. She had to follow the conductor's directions while also expressing her own interpretation. She had to be both a team member and a leader. "The piano in a concerto is like the sun in the solar system," conductor explained during one of their sessions. "All the other instruments orbit around you, but you must also be aware of their presence, their movements, their needs. It is a delicate balance." Maya struggled at first. Her timing was off. She could not hear the other instruments clearly while she was playing. She felt lost and frustrated, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by accepting this invitation. But conductor was patient and encouraging. He helped her develop new listening skills, new ways of thinking about music as a collaborative art form. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand how to be part of something larger than herself while still maintaining her individual voice. Her grandmother watched her struggle with growing concern. Maya was not eating well. She was not sleeping enough. She was pushing herself harder than ever before, and the strain was beginning to show. One evening, Wei found Maya crying at the piano, her head resting on the keys in exhaustion and frustration. "I cannot do it," Maya sobbed. "It is too hard, I am not good enough." Her grandmother sat down beside her on the bench and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Tell me what you are feeling." Maya poured out all her fears and doubts. She talked about the pressure of expectations, the terror of failing publicly, the feeling that she was a fraud who had fooled everyone into thinking she was talented. She talked about missing home, about feeling alone despite being surrounded by people, about wondering if she had made the right choices. Wei listened without interrupting, letting her granddaughter release everything that had been building inside her. When Maya finally fell silent, her grandmother spoke with quiet wisdom. "Do you remember what you told me years ago when I asked what music means to you? You said it is how you breathe. You said you cannot imagine life without it. Has that changed?" Maya shook her head slowly. "No, music is still everything to me." "Then you are already good enough," her grandmother said firmly. "Because music is not about being perfect. It is not about never making mistakes. It is about sharing something true from your heart. That is what you did in that airport when you did not even know anyone was watching. That is what you have done in every performance since. And that is what you will do in Berlin." She cupped Maya's face in her weathered hands. "You are not a fraud, my dear girl. You are the most genuine person I have ever known. Your music comes from a place of pure honesty and love. That is your gift, and no amount of pressure or fear can take it away." Maya felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anxiety that had been tightening for weeks. Her grandmother was right. She had been so focused on technical perfection that she had forgotten why she played in the first place. Not to impress people, not to prove herself worthy, but simply because music was the truest expression of who she was. From that moment, something shifted in her approach. She stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be genuine. She allowed herself to make mistakes in practice, to experiment, to play with feeling instead of fear. The music began to flow more naturally, more beautifully, more powerfully. When she finally traveled to Berlin for rehearsals with the Philharmonic, she was a different artist than she had been 3 months earlier. She was still nervous, still aware of the enormous stakes, but she was no longer paralyzed by self-doubt. The orchestra members welcomed her warmly. Many of them had seen her viral video from the airport or attended one of her concerts. They were curious to work with this young phenomenon they had heard so much about. The first rehearsal was overwhelming. Sitting at the grand piano on the stage of the Berlin, surrounded by over 100 world-class musicians, Maya felt very small. The sound of the full orchestra filled the hall, bigger and more powerful than anything she had experienced before. But as they began to work through the concerto, something magical happened. Maya found herself connected to the orchestra in a way she had not expected. Their sound supported her, lifted her, carried her along like a wave carrying a boat. When she played her solo passages, the orchestra listened with rapt attention. When they played together, their sounds merged into something greater than either could create alone. The principal conductor, a legendary German maestro named Hans, watched these rehearsals with growing admiration. He had worked with hundreds of soloists over his long career, but few had impressed him as quickly as this young Chinese girl. "She listens," he told his colleagues after one rehearsal. "Most young soloists are so focused on themselves that they forget to listen to the orchestra. But Maya listens. She responds. She is not fighting us. She is dancing with us." The night before the concert, Maya could not sleep. She lay in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, going through the concerto in her mind note by note. Her grandmother slept peacefully in the bed beside her, but Maya's thoughts would not settle. She got up quietly and walked to the window. Berlin stretched out below her, city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Tomorrow she would play for millions of people. Tomorrow her life might change forever again. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the village in the mountains, the broken piano, the airport terminal, Richard Hammond, professor, conductor, all the people who had believed in her, helped her, pushed her to become better. "I will not let them down," she whispered to the sleeping city. "I will play from my heart, and whatever happens will happen." She returned to bed and finally fell asleep, dreaming of music and mountains and home. The Berlin was one of the most famous concert halls in the world, renowned for its extraordinary acoustics and distinctive architecture. Its vineyard-style seating arrangement wrapped around the central stage, allowing the audience to surround the performers from all sides. Tonight, every one of its 2,400 seats was filled with music lovers who had traveled from across the globe. Maya stood backstage in a beautiful red dress that her mother had sent from China. It was made of silk, traditionally patterned with subtle golden flowers that caught the light when she moved. Her grandmother had helped her prepare, brushing her long black hair until it shone like polished ebony. The dressing room mirror showed a young woman on the edge of something momentous. Maya hardly recognized herself. She looked older somehow, more serious, more ready for what was about to happen. Her grandmother sat in a chair nearby, watching her granddaughter with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. In just a few minutes, Maya would walk onto that famous stage and perform for the world. Wei's heart was bursting with pride and terror in equal measure. "Your parents called while you were dressing," she said softly. "They send their love and support. The whole village is gathered at the community center to watch the broadcast together. They set up a big screen so everyone can see." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. Hundreds of people in her home village, staying up late into the Chinese night, watching her perform thousands of miles away. The thought was both comforting and overwhelming. A knock came at the door. A stage manager peeked in and announced in English, "5 minutes, miss." Maya took a deep breath and stood up. Her legs felt unsteady, but her hands were calm. Those hands that had first touched piano keys at 3 years old, that had practiced for tens of thousands of hours, that had brought joy and wonder to everyone who heard them play. Her grandmother embraced her tightly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered in Mandarin. "Now go and show them who you are." The walk from the dressing room to the stage felt like walking through a dream. Maya passed musicians warming up in the hallways, stagehands moving equipment, important-looking people in expensive clothes. Everyone nodded respectfully as she passed, recognizing the young soloist who was about to perform. She reached the wings of the stage and paused. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the audience. Thousands of faces, all waiting expectantly, all about to witness something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The orchestra was already seated, their instruments gleaming under the stage lights. Conductor Hans appeared beside her. The elderly maestro placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and leaned down to speak directly into her ear. "Are you ready?" he asked in accented English. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then let us make music together. Remember, the orchestra is with you. We will support you through every note. Trust us and trust yourself." He walked onto the stage, and the audience erupted in applause. Maya watched as he took his position on the podium and turned to face his orchestra. He raised his baton, and the hall fell silent. Then it was her turn. Maya walked onto the stage, and the applause returned, louder this time. She crossed to the grand piano, trying to remember everything she had been taught about stage presence and poise. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench to her preferred height. The keys gleamed before her, 88 black and white paths to somewhere magical. She placed her hands in position and looked up at conductor. He gave her a small smile and a nod. Then he raised his baton. The opening chords of Piano Concerto No. 2 rolled through the hall like distant thunder. The orchestra created a dark, brooding atmosphere that set the stage for the piano's entrance. Maya felt the music wash over her, felt herself becoming part of something vast and powerful. Her fingers touched the keys, and the famous opening melody emerged. Those 8 mysterious chords that had captivated audiences for over a century. Maya played them with depth and emotion, building the tension that would explode into the main theme. Then the music truly began. Maya's hands moved across the keyboard with fluid grace, producing cascades of notes that sparkled and shone against the orchestra's rich backdrop. The first movement unfolded like a story being told, with Maya as the narrator and the orchestra as the living, breathing world around her. In the audience, tears were already forming in many eyes. There was something about this young girl's playing that reached directly into people's hearts. It was not just technical skill, though her technique was flawless. It was something deeper, something truer, something that spoke of experiences and emotions that went beyond words. Richard Hammond sat in the front row, watching his with overwhelming pride. He remembered the moment he first heard her playing in Airport, the instant recognition that he was witnessing something special. Everything that had happened since had confirmed what he knew that day. Maya was destined for greatness. Professor was there too, her usually stern face softened by emotion as she watched her student perform. She had pushed Maya hard over the past 2 years, demanding perfection, accepting nothing less than Maya's absolute best. Now, watching her play with the Berlin Philharmonic, she knew that every harsh word and difficult lesson had been worth it. The first movement built toward its climax, with Maya and the orchestra playing in perfect harmony. The final notes rang out, and without pause, the second movement began. This was the famous Adagio sostenuto, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. Slow, romantic, achingly tender. Maya poured her soul into this movement. She thought about her grandfather who had first put her on a piano bench. She thought about her parents, working in the rice fields while their daughter played for kings and princes. She thought about her village, watching together on a screen thousands of miles away. She thought about everyone who had ever believed in her, supported her, loved her. The melody soared through the concert hall, touching every heart in the audience. The orchestra swelled and receded like waves on a shore, supporting Maya's expressive playing with perfect sensitivity. Conductor guided them all with subtle movements of his baton, bringing out the best in every musician. In her village in China, people were crying openly as they watched on the big screen. Maya's mother clutched her husband's hand, overwhelmed by the beauty of her daughter's playing and the distance between them. Maya's younger brother sat with wide eyes, finally understanding why his sister had left home to pursue this strange and wonderful dream. The second movement ended with a final, tender passage that seemed to hang in the air like a prayer. Then, with explosive energy, the third movement began. This was the finale, fast and exciting and technically brutal. Maya's hands flew across the keys with breathtaking speed, never missing a note, never losing the emotional thread that held the entire piece together. The audience sat on the edge of their seats as Maya and the orchestra raced toward the conclusion. The music built higher and higher, faster and faster, more and more intense. It was exhilarating and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Maya felt herself merging completely with the music. She was no longer a 14-year-old girl from a Chinese village. She was no longer nervous or afraid. She was simply a vessel through which music flowed, pure and perfect and unstoppable. The final pages approached. Maya could feel the end coming, could feel the orchestra gathering its strength for the climactic conclusion. She played the famous melody that closed the concerto, the triumphant theme that had moved audiences for generations. And then it was over. The final chord rang out through the Berlin, and for a moment there was complete silence. 2,400 people held their breath, still under the spell of what they had just experienced. Then the silence shattered into the most thunderous applause Maya had ever heard. The audience rose as one, a standing ovation that shook the very walls of the concert hall. People cheered and shouted and wept with joy. Orchestra members stood from their seats to applaud their young soloist. Conductor turned and bowed to Maya with genuine admiration. Maya stood up slowly, her legs trembling, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had played with the Berlin Philharmonic, and she had played it beautifully. The months of struggle and self-doubt, the moments of wanting to give up, the long nights of practice and worry, it had all been worth it for this moment. She bowed to the audience, then to the orchestra, then to conductor. The applause continued, growing even louder if that was possible. People began calling her name, chanting it rhythmically. Maya, Maya, Maya. In China, her village was celebrating with equal joy. People danced in the streets despite the late hour. Fireworks exploded over the community center where the broadcast had shown everything. Maya's family held each other and cried and laughed and felt their hearts would burst with pride. Backstage, Wei waited with open arms. When Maya finally made it off the stage, she fell into her grandmother's embrace and sobbed with relief and happiness. They held each other for a long time, not needing words, not needing anything except each other. Richard Hammond appeared with a phone held up triumphantly. "Your parents want to see you," he said, his own voice choked with emotion. Maya took the phone and saw her mother and father's tear-stained faces on the screen. Behind them, she could see the celebration continuing in the village, people waving and cheering when they saw her face appear. "My daughter," her mother said through her tears. "My beautiful, brilliant daughter, we are so proud of you." "I love you," Maya whispered, crying fresh tears. "I miss you so much. I wish you were here." "We are here," her father said firmly. "We were with you every single note. The whole world was with you, Maya, and the whole world saw what you can do." The night stretched on into a blur of congratulations and celebrations and interviews. Maya answered questions in English and Mandarin, posed for photographs, accepted bouquets of flowers from admirers. Through it all, she kept thinking about the journey that had brought her here. A broken piano in a village community center, a curious moment at an airport, a chance encounter with a music executive, years of hard work and sacrifice, all leading to this incredible night. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would keep playing, keep growing, keep sharing her gift with the world, because music was how she breathed. Music was who she was. And tonight, she had shown the world exactly what that meant. 10 years had passed since that magical night in Berlin, and Maya had become exactly what everyone predicted she would be. At 24 years old, she was now recognized as one of the greatest pianists of her generation, perhaps one of the greatest of all time. Her concerts sold out within minutes of tickets becoming available. Her recordings topped classical music charts around the world. Critics struggled to find new words to describe her extraordinary gifts. But fame and success had not changed who Maya was at her core. She remained humble and gracious, always crediting the people who had helped her along the way. She visited her village in China every year, playing concerts for her old neighbors who had supported her from the very beginning. She maintained close relationships with Richard Hammond, professor, and all the others who had shaped her journey. Her grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. It was the hardest loss Maya had ever experienced. Wei had been more than a grandmother. She had been a mother, a teacher, a friend, and a source of unconditional love and support through every challenge and triumph. Maya kept a photograph of her grandmother on her piano at all times. Before every performance, she would touch the frame and whisper a few words of gratitude. She believed her grandmother was still watching over her, still guiding her, still cheering from somewhere beyond the physical world. On a crisp autumn morning, Maya found herself walking through airport once again. It was the first time she had returned since that fateful day 12 years ago when her life had changed forever. She was in London for a special concert at the Royal Albert Hall, but she had arrived early specifically to visit the terminal where it all began. The airport looked different than she remembered. There were new shops and restaurants, new security procedures, new technology everywhere. But some things remained the same. The vast windows still looked out over the runways. The constant flow of travelers still created a river of humanity. And there, in the middle of Terminal 5, stood a black public piano. Maya stopped when she saw it. Her heart caught in her throat as memories flooded through her mind. She remembered being 12 years old, nervous and overwhelmed, desperate to touch the keys. She remembered playing Chopin while a crowd gathered without her knowledge. She remembered opening her eyes to find hundreds of strangers applauding her. She walked toward the piano slowly, aware that people were starting to recognize her. Whispers spread through the terminal as travelers nudged each other and pointed. "That's Maya, the famous pianist. What is she doing here?" A small crowd began to form around the piano, just as it had 12 years ago. People held up their phones, hopping to capture whatever was about to happen. Airport security officers watched from a distance, curious but not concerned. Maya reached the piano and stood beside it for a long moment. She was no longer a scared little girl from a Chinese village. She was a world-renowned artist who had played in the greatest concert halls on every continent. She had performed for presidents and queens, for packed stadiums and intimate gatherings. She had accomplished more in her young career than most musicians achieved in a lifetime. But standing here, at this piano, she felt like that 12-year-old again. She felt the same nervous excitement, the same burning need to play, the same connection to something larger than herself. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. The crowd fell silent, holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Maya closed her eyes and let her fingers begin to move. She played the same piece she had played 12 years ago, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece that had started everything, the piece that had revealed her gift to the world. The music flowed from her fingers with effortless beauty. It filled the terminal, reaching every corner, touching every heart. Travelers stopped in their tracks. Workers came out from behind their counters. Children pulled at their parents' hands, drawn by the magical sounds. But Maya did not play for the crowd. She played for everyone who had helped her reach this moment. She played for her grandmother, who had given up everything to support her dream. She played for her grandfather, who had first recognized her gift. She played for her parents and brother, who had sacrificed and supported from afar. She played for Richard Hammond, professor, conductor, and all the teachers and mentors who had shaped her abilities. She played for the old broken piano in her village community center, which had taught her that beauty could come from imperfect things. She played for every young person with a dream, who wondered if they were good enough, who faced obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome. The music built toward its dramatic conclusion, just as it had done 12 years ago. Maya's hands flew across the keys with power and precision refined by a decade of dedicated practice. The sound filled the terminal like a symphony, like a prayer, like a promise kept. The final chords rang out and silence fell. Then came the applause, thunderous and genuine, from hundreds of strangers who had just witnessed something extraordinary. People cheered and clapped and wiped tears from their eyes. Maya opened her eyes and looked around at the crowd. So much had changed since the last time she sat at this piano, but in many ways everything was exactly the same. Music still moved people. Beauty still touched hearts. Dreams were still worth pursuing no matter how impossible they seemed. She stood and bowed to the crowd, just as she had bowed to audiences in the world's most prestigious concert halls. Because here, in an airport terminal, surrounded by ordinary people going about their ordinary days, the music mattered just as much, perhaps more. A young boy pushed through the crowd and approached the piano. He was about 10 years old, with wide eyes and a shy smile. He reminded Maya of herself at that age, full of wonder and dreams. "Can I play?" he asked quietly, looking at Maya with something like worship. Maya smiled and gestured toward the bench. "Of course, the piano is for everyone." She watched as the boy sat down and began to play. His technique was rough, his notes sometimes wrong, but there was something there. A spark, a passion, a genuine love for music that no amount of training could create. Maya caught the eye of a woman in the crowd who was clearly the boy's mother. The woman looked proud and slightly embarrassed, uncertain whether to stop her son or let him continue. "He has talent," Maya said to her. "Has he been playing long?" The mother shook her head. "Just a year. He is always asking to practice. We cannot afford proper lessons, but he teaches himself from videos on the internet." Maya felt something shift in her heart. This boy was starting his journey exactly as she had started hers, teaching himself on whatever instrument he could access, driven by pure love for music. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, not Richard Hammond's card, but her own. "Contact this number," she said, handing it to the mother. "I work with a foundation that provides music education to talented children who cannot afford it. I would like to help your son if you will let me." The mother's eyes widened with disbelief. "You would do that for us?" Maya looked at the boy, still playing happily at the piano, lost in his own world of sound. 12 years ago, I sat at this exact piano as a little girl from a poor village in China. I had no money, no connections, no way to pursue my dream. But people believed in me and helped me. Now it is my turn to do the same for others." She had spent the last several years building that foundation, using her fame and resources to support young musicians around the world. She had funded scholarships, donated instruments to schools, created programs that helped talented children regardless of their background. It was her way of honoring everyone who had helped her way of ensuring that the next Maya would not be held back by circumstances beyond their control. The boy finished his piece and looked up at Maya with shining eyes. "Was that okay?" he asked. "It was beautiful," Maya told him honestly. "Keep practicing. Keep playing. Never give up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they seem. You never know what might happen when you sit down at a piano in an airport." She said goodbye to the boy and his mother, to the crowd still gathered around the piano, to the terminal that had changed her life. Then she walked toward her gate, feeling the same mixture of excitement and nervousness she had felt 12 years ago. Her concert at the Royal Albert Hall that night would be one of the finest performances of her career. Critics would rave about her emotional depth and technical mastery. Audiences would give her a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. But the moment Maya would remember most clearly from that day was not the concert. It was the look in that young boy's eyes when she told him to never give up on his dreams. It was the feeling of passing on hope to the next generation, just as hope had been passed to her. Because that was what music was really about, not fame or fortune or standing ovations. It was about connection. It was about touching hearts and changing lives. It was about a gift that could be shared endlessly, growing stronger each time it was given away. Maya understood this better than most. She had learned it at a broken piano in a Chinese village. She had confirmed it at a public piano in an airport terminal, and she would spend the rest of her life proving it to the world, one beautiful note at a time. Her story had begun with a young girl stepping up to an airport piano, but it would never really end. Because the music would play on forever, in the hearts of everyone who had heard it, in the dreams of everyone who had been inspired by it, in the next generation of musicians who would carry the melody into the future. This was her legacy. This was her purpose. This was the gift she had been given, and the gift she would continue to give until her very last day. And somewhere, watching over her with loving eyes, her grandmother smiled.